How do we navigate things like cultural trends, current world events, and disagreement in church? Honest Conversations is a deeper dive into some of your important questions that we don't always have time to cover in a Sunday morning service. Ready to dive in? Let's join Andrew and Brooke for today's Honest Conversation.
Sabbath. We are talking about a subject that a lot of Christians, frankly, do not place a lot of importance on. We talked last week about distractions and how do you recenter on God. So how do we take this idea of Selah, which we do at church, and implement it into our daily lives?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think Selah can be totally one of those like tools in the tool belt sort of things that I hope people can take, from church. It's like, wow, that was only 3 minutes. It felt like an eternity, but there's actually a handful of times in my life I have 3 minutes before the next thing. And I didn't know that I didn't need like a sermon or a good worship song to get me wound up for my next meeting. Like maybe I just need to quiet down for just a second and like make space for God in my life and, reorient on him. So I think that could be, I'm hoping that that's something that people are taking away. And I know for me, it's like you taste the peace of God in that, and it kind of makes you hungry for more of it. And there's value in like, ooh, I just tasted something new there. I want more of that. How do I like live there? And that's a good question to ask and start really journeying down, which, that's a good one to walk. That's a good road to walk down with the Lord.
Do you think it's a muscle that needs to be built? Because I know for me and my undiagnosed ADD mind, sometimes 3 minutes, like you said, feels like a long time. And sitting with the Lord and being still sometimes is difficult. Like, yes, it's good. And afterwards you're like, that was amazing. But then for some reason, the next time you have an opportunity to do it, you're a little like, oof. Yeah. It's a little daunting just sitting and being still. Why is that?
Yeah. And I think this starts to get into Sabbath, which I think you mentioned. It's like, it's hard because it's a faith step and it's a faith muscle thing. It's not just like, oh, I can be quiet. And anybody can be quiet. And this is, anybody can talk about, how meditation is good and being quiet is good and like slow down and take big, deep breaths. Those are all taking kind of a godly principle and kind of taking God out of it, and just sort of doing some of the stuff. And so there's still some residual value, in this idea, but the Sabbath is about letting go of everything that you attach yourself to and accepting the fact that it's God's mercy that he like loves me and sanctifies me. So Exodus, I think it's like 33. I don't remember where it is exactly, but God's talking about Sabbath and he says, this will be a sign between you and all the generations that it is I that sanctifies you. So Sabbath and rest aren't the same thing. Sabbath is spiritual. Sabbath is a faith offering to God to say, I am resting, but I'm resting from all my works. I'm resting from accomplishing and producing, not so that my body can have a break, although that does happen and your body does need a break. That's not the main point. The main point is that I'm, like we talked about, Selah is that physical encounter with stopping and transitioning into church and being like, okay, I'm focusing on God. Sabbath is the whole life faith step and offering of stopping and saying like, it's only God. God provides for me. God loves me. When I'm sitting here and doing nothing for anybody, including him, God sanctifies me. And that is hard to accept. We like, being productive and we like proving ourselves. All of that stuff. Like grace is hard to accept.
Is, practically speaking, is there a way to do Sabbath?
Yeah. So Sabbath is all through the Old Testament, and then there's a bunch of stuff with Sabbath and Jesus while he's walking around. Mainly him breaking the Sabbath and really tripping people out. And it trips me out. Like, that's fascinating. I mean, in the Old Testament, God's like, if you don't keep my Sabbath, I'm gonna kill all of you. Like, that's a death penalty thing, which is interesting. So, but that's good to know that, because this all helps paint the picture of the theology of Sabbath. That's like, okay, this is a big deal to God.
Yeah.
What's going on here? It's a big deal to God. In that context, this is you lose your life if you don't rest in God. That's what's happening. And then Jesus, who is God and doesn't abolish the law, he fulfills the law, and he starts breaking all these Sabbath rules. And, there's nuance to go in there. Some of them, weren't necessarily Sabbath rules from God. They were Sabbath rules that people had made in an effort to try to keep up with what God said. Like, you can carry a stick this far, but not this far, that kind of stuff. But like, he heals on the Sabbath, which the religious leaders weren't okay with. His disciples pick some grain on the Sabbath, which was like, that was against their rules and all this sort of stuff. So that's really interesting. Because it's like, is Jesus bucking God? But he is God, but that doesn't make sense that he'd contradict. So what's going on here? And at one point, Jesus says, like, the Sabbath wasn't, or man wasn't made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for God. Man wasn't made for the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for man.
Yeah.
And so he's pointing out, like, you've become completely oriented. Even Sabbath has become a works for you to accomplish righteousness. And you've missed this whole thing. Like, you're not alive so that you can Sabbath and not work on Sundays or Saturdays. He's saying this was made for man. There's something in this that's for you. And that goes back, it makes kind of the Old Testament thing make more sense. But then Hebrews 4 talks about now believers enter into the Sabbath rest of God through Jesus Christ. So Jesus is now our entry into, quote, the Sabbath rest of God. So he's fulfilling something, he's completing something, he's magnifying and maximizing something here. And it contrasts different things. But the point is, Jesus is the fulfillment of the Sabbath, which the point of Sabbath is grace. It's, I cannot work my way to God. I cannot be big enough in my own life to be God. Like, I'm not just going to work nonstop because I'm actually trusting in myself to provide for myself. I'm finding my identity and all these sort of things. And so the Sabbath rest that we're supposed to now not just do on Sundays, but we're invited to live in the Sabbath rest of God, which is living in the grace of God. And so that's the reality of the gospel and of salvation. Salvation is stepping into the Sabbath rest of God. And so you go back to like day 7, you never get the part where God, quote, starts working again. It's like he's now reality. What we're supposed to live in is that rest of God, it's the surrender and the relationship and the religion and the practice I'll stop.
So if Jesus is the fulfillment of the Sabbath, why do we need to practice it?
Yeah. So we have to practice the Sabbath first in being saved. That's Sabbath first. So there still is the death penalty for not keeping the Sabbath. You will die in your sin if you don't rest in God and his righteousness and his sanctification. So there's that. And then you start getting into, so that is salvation, and then life in God is supposed to be from Sabbath rest. We're not supposed to rest on God on one day a week. Everything's supposed to come out of the grace of God. So it got bigger. It's like Sermon on the Mount. Jesus takes these laws, like, you've already said this, but like, let me make this bigger. Not get rid of it, let me make this bigger. And that's what Jesus does with the Sabbath. It's like, it's not just trust in God and rest in him on this day. It's actually supposed to be, you're supposed to be born again into this existence of the grace of God and live from there.
For all of the rule followers who are listening to this and going, whoa, 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 whoa. Are you telling me I don't need to take one day out of the week to Sabbath? What would you say to that?
I would say first, you need to take your whole life in Sabbath. Because what's more important than taking a nap on Sunday is living in the reality that God is your Father.
Do you think that being intentional with one day out of the week helps you do that for the rest of your days?
Big time.
Okay.
For sure. And so like that's where something like even Selah,
Yes.
that's 3 minutes.
Yeah.
That's big too. So then it's like spend time with God in the morning. That's when we put these disciplines around this to help me because I get distracted.
Okay. So you're not saying don't worry about taking one day. You're saying it should be every day for you, but using a spiritual discipline helps you get there?
Yes. I'm also, I hear you.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Well, I'm making sure I understand.
I know, they're the right questions because it's like, it's exactly what you're saying. So it has to be our lives is living from the grace of God. And if I'm not doing that, taking a day a week off isn't going to do anything for my spiritual life.
Yeah.
It will help you physically because there are physical, like people, you need rest, you need to sleep at night, you need days off, you need all that sort of stuff. But we're not made for those things. Those things are made for us, is what Jesus says. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So there's not the legalism now of like, I rest from works because God sanctifies me, but now if I don't take Sabbath, then I'm not righteous in God's eyes. It's like, okay, that's what Jesus was confronting.
Okay.
It's like you just made another rule.
Yeah.
And thinking that that's going to bring life. But so the first thing has to come first. I have to be saved. I have to be born again.
Yeah.
Then there's spiritual disciplines that help me live in the reality that I stepped into or got born again into. So I still massively encourage rhythms of Sabbath, whether that's like, you can implement that, I think, in a lot of different ways. And I think for the most part, we need to make it challenge us more than like try to squeeze something in here or there, because it is then the physical offering of faith that's like, ooh, I'm like actually having to think about this all day, that I'm like not going to go get a bunch of stuff done as a disciplining of my flesh and my mind, not because mowing the lawn is bad and I think God loves me more because I mowed the lawn. But it's like, I don't think this is a work thing, but it's that we've got to discipline ourselves and come up against these things that we say we believe. And there's physical, this is where like back to kind of the liturgy, type of conversation. Like these are physical things that help us get to where we say we are spiritually, because there is connection there. I don't know if that made enough sense, but keep asking.
No, absolutely, it does. And I got a picture of like the retainer, the braces. When kids, you have to tighten the braces constantly, right, to keep things in line, or else they will just naturally become crooked again.
Yeah.
This is just kind of one of those practices where it's not about what you are or aren't doing specifically. It's about your heart posture and tightening it to the will of God constantly, because our natural tendencies as Americans specifically is achievement. And I know for me personally on Sabbath, it's almost muscle memory where I'm going, I was about to go put a load of laundry, and it's not about the laundry, but it's about refocusing. Wait, I'm not achieving. Like I am accepting the grace that you talked about, which is hard. And I don't think we talk about that. We think grace, it's all good. It's all love. It's all, and it's like, no, to accept it is work. It's hard work.
It's really hard. And that's why Sabbath and rest aren't the same thing. When you physically Sabbath, you do get rest, but not everything you do to rest is Sabbath. Like you could not do the laundry just because you are taking a break from the laundry.
Right.
Which is great. It's like, please take a nap. Like that's all. Rest is great. And leisure is great and fun is awesome. And like, we've got to have these things, but that's where, it's just all that is then, like I said, kind of taking the principle, but maybe leaving God out of it. What makes Sabbath is relying on the grace of God. And it's that offering to him and saying like and then that's where you start to see the snowball into every area of your life. Saying no to the laundry on Sabbath doesn't just become like, oh no, God said I have to not do laundry today or he'll kill me. It's like, whoa, I'm going to not do that thing that I need to get done. But the reason I'm not doing it is because it makes me realize how weak I am, how limited I am. I don't have all the time in the world. And I am weak. Like, I don't have time to do all the things I need to get done, which is why I need to go do this right now. But I'm actually going to stop as an offering to the Lord to discipline myself to say, like, God, even when I'm full and busy, I still, like, you come first. And I'm going to, like, sit here for 3 minutes, Selah, and just commune with God. And I'm going to trust him with my time, and it's like, like you said, the laundry is so not the point. But then you do that on your Sabbath day, and all of a sudden the 3 minutes before your meeting on Wednesday, you're doing that same thing. It's not Sabbath day, but that's the Sabbath rest of God is like, man, whatever's about to go down, like what I need the grace of God. I need the voice of God. I need the presence of God. I don't just need to go do this in my own strength because I'm really not that big and I'm really not that strong. And I'm not enough for what the world needs anyways. I'm not enough for what I need. I can't even get all my laundry done in a week.
Wow. So good and so important, because I think one of the biggest things that happens through Selah and through Sabbath is yes, us glorifying the Lord, but it's also having the space to hear from him. Mm-hmm. And we are hearing so much from the world. I mean, more than ever, we have avenues to hear. We have podcasts, we have social media, we have the news, we have talk radio, and we are hearing so many messages. And so next week, we're going to talk about how to use this time of Selah and hearing from the Lord to help us navigate these spaces of controversy, because they're getting louder, they're multiplying, and we're going to tackle some of these tough issues. Specifically, next week we're going to look into the abortion debate. So we hope you join us, and looking forward to it.
Thanks.